Welcome to today's talk. My name is Regina DeMeo. I'm a family law attorney in Maryland and DC. I've been practicing for 22 years now. And with me today, I have Heidi Webb. She's the founder of Consilium Divorce Consultations in Massachusetts. Thanks so much for being here, Heidi.
Thanks so much for having me, Regina. It's lovely to see you and to talk.
Absolutely. So how long ago did you make the switch from litigation to focusing on mediation and alternative dispute resolution?
Um, hmm. That's an interesting question because I guess I formally started Consilium process about 10 years ago. Although I'd always tried to incorporate mediation and alternative dispute resolution into my litigation practice. So in that sense, I guess I felt like I was always doing it. It's just that I had a really pivotal experience that made me recognize how infrequently litigation was a good course for families. And if you want, I can tell you a little bit about that experience and how that sort of made me pivot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so many years ago, I had litigated a case that was hotly contested between parents over young children, and we both lawyers, I think, felt like we were zealous advocates for our clients' positions, and for various reasons felt like we, went to the mat for them, and for what they believed would be in their children's best interests. And fast forward many years later, I was watching the 11 o'clock news one night, and on flashes the image of a young Marine killed in Iraq. And I recognized him as the little boy in this divorce so many years before. And it was really heart wrenching. And I called his mom and went to the funeral, full military funeral. And, the boy was, I consider him a boy, he was only 19 years old when he died. Um, and one of his high school teachers eulogized him and said, in part, that the reason he joined the Marines was because he felt like he never had a family. And I sat there and I thought, my God, we did so much at that time that we thought was right. And clearly for him, that wasn't our solution. And that didn't restructure his family in a way that made him feel whole.
Mhm.
And it really caused me to say, what could I have done differently? What questions could I have asked that were different of his mother? How did the process serve this family or not serve this family? And there were so many junctures that when I thought about it, from discovery to depositions to court appearances, that I just thought there were other ways. And if I were really honest with myself and I really stood back and said, could I have done this differently, despite the domestic violence, despite the fact that these two people were extraordinarily competitive, both, as the judge said, overly invested in their children. They were both actually pediatricians, um, the parents. I I really felt like this could have been resolved differently. Not that the outcome necessarily even would have been so different, but the way that the parents got there was so harrowing that it left this family shattered and unable to really effectively restructure. So I sort of swore to myself I wouldn't do that anymore. And I'd find another way. And that was the concilium process. So that's how it sort of evolved.
I think we all have our war stories. I mean, I know one case that haunts me. The couple spent $500,000 in legal fees, right? All sorts of fees, including an attorney for the child. And in the end, all the college money was gone. And the child is not speaking to one parent right now. So it does make you wonder, like, was it really worth that battle?
That's right. I remember the judge in that case at a pretrial conference saying, "You're going to spend your kid's college education on this divorce." Exactly those words. And it's true,
Yeah.
and incredibly unfortunate. And the years later, that there was an attorney for the children in that case as well, who later became a judge. And when she was retiring, I went to see her, and I had just written a book, and gave her a copy of it. And I said, I don't know if you'll recognize or not one of the scenarios in there. And she said, not only will I recognize it, I remember how much he loved dinosaurs, as we talked about it. And this was so many years later, and you think, as lawyers, by now I've probably had 1,000 clients if I've had one. And Yet there are some situations, some scenarios, some people that are just, they stay with you. I mean, all your clients are special, but um, the circumstances of that family were unique, and the outcome was, resoundingly not what we would have wished for.
Right. So you work with some premarital couples, right? Like they're thinking of getting married and they come to you. What kind of services do you provide for them?
Yeah, well, there are couples, who are entering a marriage and want to have a prenuptial agreement. And I think, again, the premise of a prenuptial agreement in and of itself is um, it's complicated. Like, why? Why is there a lack of trust at the very beginning? Is there a public company that needs to be protected? Like, what are the interests here, and why is someone seeking a prenup? And I think that sometimes, I've been in situations where representing one party and the other lawyers like, we got to keep the parties apart. They can't hear this. We have to just sort of hammer out the agreement. And it's their life, it's their marriage, and we're trying to structure something that hopefully will make it an effective marriage, not an effective, I mean, you're thinking about, in the event that there's a divorce, there are certain, either other third parties that need to be protected, other families, business interests. I mean, what is it that you're seeking to do? But hopefully it's not just, positioning for a divorce.
Right.
Otherwise, you've got to ask, why are you getting married? Um, but presumably when people are entering a prenup, there's either future inheritance or a business interest or a former marriage, other interests, other people who are complicated, and the marriage isn't just about the two people.
Right.
So I think without distilling what the real issues are, it can become sort of a, you just want to keep things from me conversation, and or you're just trying to position yourself for a better divorce. And I don't think people who really, intend to, who are in love and want to get married, that's their goal. A lot of
Right.
times prenups are driven by families, by parents of one of the parties. um, there's one that I've been working on for a while now that's clearly the case, and the kids that people getting married don't really want the prenup, but there's a public company involved, and there's just no way that they can, I'm not, no way, but I mean, it would be bordering on negligent for to sort of involve a whole corporation in potentially,
Right.
if this marriage doesn't work out, without having attended to sort of the impact that would potentially have. And that's just a responsibility that you have as a member of that family,
Right.
and that's part of the ethic. And people raised in that environment, typically, well, raised well in that environment, understand sort of the importance of third parties. Um, so
No, I totally agree. I have the same experience. But you also help couples that are married figure
yeah,
things out, like if they're going through something difficult. What kind of services do you do with married couples?
sure. That sort of evolved over time, and it wasn't something I initially set out to do. And couples therapists actually started approaching me saying, we've been working with this couple and they're trying really hard to stay married, but I don't know, it just seems like there's a pretty good chance it's not going to end up that way. And we think it would really help them to know what divorce is about. Like, maybe it'll either help them work harder on the marriage, or maybe it will just give them enough confidence that they can restructure their lives effectively post marriage to know what that path's like. Would you help them discern what those possible other avenues and paths might look like? So I developed something, it's a discernment process where I really take people through the paces of, if you were to head down this path for, a variety of sort of reasons you've now distilled, um, would mediation, collaborative law, litigation, conciliation, arbitration, what are the concerns here about a process, and how would that help you restructure your family effectively. And that's the language I really use too, is restructuring a family as opposed to divorcing. Because at that point, if people have, children and money, I often say to clients, when a judge says it's over, it's not over. So if you share children and finances, you will still have interactions. The question is, what will those interactions look like? And how much of an agent do you want to be over the creation of that dynamic? Because, you can cede all power to the court, or you can very much sort of like be in the weeds and help design this. But I think that it's important for people to understand the differences and then to make sort of active choices. And I think when people are an agent of that decision, they do much better in the process.
Plus, I think there's also a compliance issue. If the court orders you to do something that you think is not fair, you may not comply. Whereas if you were part of the decision-making process, you're more likely to abide by the agreement.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right. I mean, it's your agreement, right? And otherwise, it's like you get into, this, you get an order and a contempt, and, it's like you can head down that path for, I remember actually an old former dentist of mine who'd been divorced telling me he was going back to court just like the Army Navy game, go back every year. It's like you can do that, but who does that serve?
Right. So the couples that do decide to go ahead and go forward with the divorce, you do some work in guiding them through the process. What kind of steps do you take with them when they make that decision?
Yeah. Well, when I consult with people from the very beginning in the Consilium process, that's sort of I help people distill not only what the divorce will look like, but really what they're trying to create for themselves in a sort of parallel path of growth. Because presumably when people are making this choice, they're unhappy. But I think it's not difficult to understand why someone who's unhappy might say, it's my marriage, I'm out of here. That will make me happy. Will it? So I think the question is, what is it? Can you get to the bottom of that? And maybe that's a therapy question, but sometimes asking those questions helps people realize, part of my frustration is that I've been home for, 9 years with my kids, and I really wanted to go to graduate school and I never did. Well, that really can help inform the structuring of a divorce agreement. If we're saying, not only is support going to be part of a package, but if you're saying to your soon to be former spouse, I want to become independent and this is how I want to do it. I need support to get there. But this is my goal. That feels not so bad often to someone who's paying support. It's like, okay, I get that we have this, this my responsibility, and I get that this is something I'm going to pay. But if, it's a former wife, if she's working towards something and I can see the end in sight for me in terms of paying support because she will becoming independent, that sort of serves everybody better. So I think helping people pre-fade and say, where do you want to be in 20 years, 15, 10, 5, 3, next year, and then build that path at, parallel to the divorce. Then you sort of arrive somewhere with growth, as opposed to what I got very tired of hearing people say in the litigation process, investing 2 or 3 years in a litigation process, getting divorced, getting what as a lawyer I thought was a great settlement, and then hearing, now what do I do with my life?
Right.
And that just seemed so counterproductive. So part of what we do is we help with that, and then we create a synopsis that is a legal, financial, sort of psychosocial analysis of a case very early on, before our clients even interview lawyers, that gets deployed to lawyers who we choose for our clients to interview. And meanwhile, we draft questions for our clients to ask consecutive lawyers so they can start to become more informed consumers, and they can ask a series of people the same questions and start to see a nuanced sort of difference in the answers. And the lawyers say it puts them about 6 months down the road because we know what they need to know. So, it's, I'm looking at it from a lawyer's perspective in terms of what's the discovery that would be necessary if this was a litigation case, what's missing, what's known, and packaging it for the lawyer in a way that is really digestible. When clients approach lawyers, often they don't know what lawyers need to know and what they
Right.
don't. So sometimes there's this like just spilling of so much information, which is fine. I get it. I hear it. And then I sort of can say, well, what's the content and what's the context and where do these things intersect? And what is it the lawyer really needs to know to do the job? And what is it a therapist needs to know? What is it a, real estate broker needs to know? It's like, where do these things sort of intersect? And where, who do you see to serve this person best? And then we sort of stay on the case as a consultant for the client. And that takes many different forms, everything from working very directly. I was in a 2-hour conference yesterday with a lawyer in preparation for a collaborative meeting. And that, working very closely with her and with the client on that case. There are other times when clients just check in with us. They'd like us to preview an agreement that's been drafted. Other times lawyers will ask us if, can we do an assist in terms of drafting documents, motions. It depends sort of on what's needed in terms of the case, what support and help we can give. But pretty much we're there for our client as an advocate in the process. And sometimes, if things are breaking down between the lawyer and the client might ask if we can intercede or have a conversation with the lawyer. The client may be frustrated, the lawyer may be frustrated, but we can act as the fulcrum there. And, lawyers and clients typically don't want to irritate each other. They want to have a good relationship, but sometimes there's a misunderstanding or a need for some clarification. And we can usually be the person who sort of is the translator of that.
That makes sense. And do you also involve referrals to other professionals like financial neutrals or divorce coaches, parenting
Certainly
coaches?
In the collaborative process, very much. And we help hire coaches in the collaborative process as well. So often, either if we're working, and we do sometimes work with couples, and in which case I'm not an advocate, I'm a neutral.
Right.
Just like with a mediation. But sometimes I'll work with a couple from the very beginning and help them both hire collaborative attorneys and the coach. So putting the whole team together. And I had a really interesting case this year where that was the case. And partway in through the process, the wife in that instance really didn't feel like her lawyer was the right match for her, even though she'd interviewed a number of lawyers. She'd hired this person she thought was going to be a good fit. And, I had conversations both with the lawyer and with the client, and they agreed to part ways. And, the lawyer agreed certainly that she would help the new lawyer that was
Right.
hired sort of get up to speed. And, I sort of managed that sort of transition. And I had a conversation with the second lawyer the other day, and, so much progress had been made. It was just, a situation where their communication styles were different enough that they didn't feel like it was working. And, no one was in the end sort of upset. It was sort of an understanding, like, this isn't going to work. But I was able to hear from the husband's lawyer and the wife's lawyer and talk to both of, the clients and sort of understand what that dynamic was to sort of help hone in on that second lawyer and what the need was and what was, what the disconnect was in that first go. So
That makes sense. And I guess along the way, you're also educating people on whether their case is best suited for mediation or collaborative. Because I get that question a lot. As much as I love the collaborative process, maybe the couple doesn't really need that level of service, right? So you're helping them discern that.
Exactly. And we do sometimes work as outside counsel when people are mediating with other, obviously
Right.
only doing that in Massachusetts. Whereas the Consilium process, we work in many states and, internationally, actually, because the part that's not
Okay.
the legal part, we can sort of do in other states, working with outside legal counsel in those states. So that can be effective as well. Yeah.
So in this book that you co-wrote, Dissolution to Evolution, you talk about the importance of creating a parallel path for personal growth while going through the divorce. And I was just wondering if you could expand on that, because I know for me, like the biggest change I see for people is that previously a lot of them had no clue about the finances. And what I found like very inspiring and empowering is that through the divorce process, unfortunately, it's when people really started to learn about budgets and financial responsibility and taking ownership for what they can do to become self-supporting, and the transformation is amazing, right? But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what you were referring to when you mentioned that in your book.
Yeah. Some of it is what you're talking about, you know, in terms of just becoming sort of more, um, I guess, empowered in the process. But some of it is sort of identifying the piece of the person who, you know, is my client that doesn't feel fully whole for whatever reason. If that's oftentimes, you know, I think I've worked with people who've started businesses, with people who've gone back to school, with people who've pre-fated, you know, the ages of their kids and when they want to re-enter the workforce, what kind of preparatory work they want to do in order to get there. So recalling someone who had young kids and wanted to go to nursing school, but had a lot of prerequisites to do before she could do that. But when the kids were young, she could do the prerequisites, thinking about it now and then applying as the kids were school age, and she could sort of like see her way clear that way. So, you know, feeling like that process was, you know, fulfilling something in her that was, you know, a goal she had always had, but by the same token, you know, the marriage wasn't working and she wanted to end it. But it would have felt very different, I think, to end the marriage and feel like she was stuck at home being supported by a former spouse, as opposed to creating sort of her own path forward and could see sort of where that was going in a positive way. So that's, you know, I've seen people do that in many different forms. Um,
That's amazing.
yeah, yeah, it's really gratifying actually to see, you know, to sort of see that positive upside to this. And it
Right.
really, I think, does help couples who, you know, for whatever reason, the marriage is ending, but there was some nugget that originally drew them together. And if they have children and they're going to have an ongoing relationship with each other in some way, you know, the more whole each person feels, the more able they are to effectively sort of work together as co-parents on their children's behalf. So
Absolutely. Heidi, this has been great. If people want to reach out to you for further information, or get a copy of your book, how can they do that?
sure. Well, the website is the consiliumpath.com or consiliumdivorce.com. Both will bring you there. It's CONSILIUM, divorce. At info@consiliumdivorce.com. People can reach out to us or call us directly at 781-259-1500. And
Is the book on Amazon?
the book is on Amazon
Okay.
and it's also on our website. So Dissolution to Evolution, either way.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time today.
My pleasure, and really lovely to talk to you. I hope you have a wonderful day. Stay safe.
Thank you. You too. And thank you all for tuning in.